The afternoon light filtered through the glass windows of the penthouse, drawing elongated shadows across the polished marble. On the 42nd floor of New York's most iconic skyscraper, the tense silence was only interrupted by the soft tinkling of a cloth against glass and the muffled murmur of voices in the conference room. Emily Parker, her forehead damp with sweat and her grey uniform perfectly pressed, meticulously cleaned the windows while observing through the reflection the scene unfolding behind her. Sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones who least see what's right in front of their eyes, thought Emily, as her hand traced perfect circles on the glass. In the boardroom, Michael Harrison was impatiently tapping on the table. At 45, he had built a real estate empire spanning 3 continents, but now a simple document in English threatened to unravel months of negotiations. "This is unacceptable," he thundered, throwing his gold pen onto the scattered documents. "I need this translation by tomorrow, and our official translator is unreachable, on some flight to Tokyo." The 4 executives around him exchanged uncomfortable glances. The contract with American investors represented an unprecedented expansion opportunity for the Harrison Group, but the English clauses contained technicalities that none of them was confident enough to handle. "We could try an urgent translation agency," suggested Victoria Matthews, the financial director, nervously checking her watch, "though I doubt they could deliver with the necessary quality before tomorrow's meeting." Emily, who had silently moved to the next window, paused. Her dark eyes shone with determination as she squeezed the damp cloth between her hands. She took a deep breath and, contravening all the unwritten rules about the invisibility of cleaning staff, turned and approached the half-open door. "I'll translate it for $500, she said clearly, her accent mixing New York cadences with hints of her time abroad. 5 pairs of eyes turned to her with expressions ranging from surprise to indignation. A dense silence invaded the room before laughter erupted. "You?" Michael arched an eyebrow, not bothering to hide his disbelief. "And what do you know about international real estate contracts?" Emily held his gaze, unfazed. The golden afternoon light illuminated her face, revealing delicate but firm features beneath her simple bun. "Enough to save you from disappointment tomorrow, Mr. Harrison." The executives exchanged mocking smiles while Michael slowly rose from his Italian leather chair. With a deliberately measured pace, he walked toward Emily and extracted a $50 bill from his leather wallet. "Take this for your initiative," he offered condescendingly. "But we need professionals for this." Emily looked at the bill without taking it. With methodical movements, she stored her cleaning products in the cart, took her worn backpack from the side pocket, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "500 or nothing, Mr. Harrison, and I assure you that you won't find a better translation in all of New York, at least not before tomorrow." The confidence in her voice made Michael hesitate. The room fell silent as the businessman assessed the young woman. After a moment that seemed eternal, he nodded curtly. 500, but if there's a single mistake, you'll never set foot in this building again. You have until 8 in the morning." Emily took the documents with a slight nod. "I'll be here at 7. As the door closed behind her, none of those present could imagine that this exchange would irrevocably change the fate of everyone in that luxurious penthouse. Emily's apartment, a small third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, contrasted brutally with the penthouse where she worked each afternoon. The peeling walls were covered with bookshelves overflowing with books in various languages, the only extravagance in an otherwise austere space. At 28, Emily had learned to live with the basics. She placed the documents on her small table and turned on her laptop, an outdated but functional model. While waiting for it to start up, she prepared coffee and changed from her cleaning uniform into worn jeans and a loose t-shirt. The jingling of keys announced her mother's arrival before her voice. "Emily, you're already home?" Margaret Parker appeared in the kitchen doorway with a tired expression. At 52, her premature wrinkles and dyed hair to hide the grey told the story of a life of efforts. Her surprise was evident at seeing her daughter home so early. "Did something happen at work?" she asked with concern. Emily served 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her mother with an enigmatic smile. "Something like that. I got an extra translation job, $500 for a contract." Margaret sat down slowly, her eyes evaluating her daughter. "From the company where you clean. Do they know that?" That their cleaner has a master's in translation and interpretation? No, Mum. They just saw a girl in a grey uniform who dared to speak when she shouldn't. Margaret sighed, taking her daughter's hand. You're brilliant, Emily. You always have been, ever since you translated stories into French for the neighbourhood kids when you were only 10. And what good has it done me? Emily muttered, though without real bitterness in her voice. 5 languages, a perfect GPA, and cleaning bathrooms for rich people, while James from my class works in Brussels. The silence that followed was laden with untold stories, sacrifices, and forced decisions. Margaret's illness 3 years ago had coincided with the bankruptcy of the small family restaurant business, and the savings for Emily to complete her doctorate had vanished between treatments and debts. "How are you feeling today?" asked Emily, deliberately changing the subject. "Better. The new treatment seems to be working." Margaret avoided mentioning the side effects or the cost of medications not covered by insurance. "Have you talked to David?" Emily shook her head. Her relationship with David Wilson, a high school teacher in the neighborhood, was going through a complicated moment. He didn't understand why Emily refused to look for work in language schools, insisting she could earn more and leave cleaning jobs behind. "He doesn't understand, Mom. I can't afford a job with fixed hours while coordinating your medical appointments." She paused and pointed to the documents. "Besides, this could be an opportunity." Margaret looked at the papers with skepticism. "Be careful, honey. People like Harrison, they don't usually appreciate when their employees know more than them." Emily smiled, turning on the desk lamp. "Don't worry. To them, I'm just the cleaning girl who happens to know English." As her mother retired to rest, Emily immersed herself in the contract. To her surprise, she discovered linguistic subtleties and legal terms specific to the American real estate market that might have gone unnoticed by a regular translator. Several clauses contained deliberate ambiguities that, if translated literally, would put the Harrison Group at a clear disadvantage. As the night progressed, Emily alternated between translation and her personal notes, recording observations about the possible intentions behind each ambiguous term. Without intending to, she was doing much more than a simple translation. She was unraveling the counterparty's negotiation strategy. At 3 in the morning, when silence in the streets was almost absolute, Emily stopped to look at her work. What had begun as an opportunity to earn extra money had become an exhaustive analysis that could change the course of a multi-million-dollar negotiation. For the first time in a long time, she felt the tingle of intellectual excitement, the satisfaction she only experienced when putting her true capabilities to the test. She allowed herself a smile as she saved the document. Michael Harrison and his executives expected no more than a rudimentary translation from their cleaner. What they would get would be a masterclass in linguistics applied to international business. Sometimes, thought Emily as she turned off the computer, the real power isn't in who signs the checks, but in who understands the words behind them. The clock showed 6:45 when Emily crossed the lobby of the imposing glass and steel building. The security guard, Paul, greeted her with surprise. "Emily, don't you start at 3 today?" "I have a meeting with Mr. Harrison," she replied naturally, while adjusting a borrowed blazer from her cousin, the most formal attire she could get on such short notice. Paul let out a disbelieving laugh, but allowed her to pass. Emily rode up in the elevator, feeling the curious glances of staff beginning their day. The sensation was strange. She normally used the service elevator and avoided rush hours, following the unwritten instructions for maintenance personnel. Upon reaching the 42nd floor, she found the office reception still empty. Only the light filtering from Michael's office indicated someone had arrived as early as she had. Emily took a deep breath, smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from her shirt, and knocked on the door. "Come in." Michael Harrison was exactly where she expected to find him, behind his mahogany desk, with a steaming cup of coffee and his brow furrowed over a computer screen. He looked up, and surprise briefly crossed his face before he regained his impassive expression. "Punctual," he commented dryly. "I expected no less." Emily placed a black folder on the desk, along with a USB drive. "The complete translation, in print and digital format. I've included explanatory notes on certain terms that could be interpreted ambiguously in the American legal context." Michael arched an eyebrow, visibly skeptical, but opened the folder. Emily remained standing, watching as his eyes scanned the first pages. Gradually, the businessman's expression transformed. Skepticism gave way to interest, and finally, to absolute concentration. After 10 minutes of silence, Michael looked up. "Sit down," he ordered, pointing to the chair across from him. "Where did you learn to do this?" "Columbia University, Masters in Legal and Economic Translation and Interpretation," Emily replied simply. "Specialization in North American markets." The businessman studied her with new curiosity. "And you clean offices because they pay punctually and allow me to care for my sick mother." Emily's answer was direct, without self-pity. "Flexible hours are worth more than a framed degree when you have family responsibilities." Michael nodded slowly, as if processing new information about an unknown species. He opened a drawer and extracted an envelope. "Your $500 as agreed," he slid it across the desk. "But I'm intrigued by your notes on Clause 7. Do you really think they're trying to limit our structural modification capacity?" Emily hesitated a moment, surprised by the question. She hadn't expected Michael to ask for her opinion. "I don't just think so, I'm certain," she responded, pointing to a specific paragraph. "The literal translation would be correct, but the American legal context gives this expression a much broader scope. If you sign it this way, any subsequent renovation would need their explicit approval, even for minor modifications." Michael observed her with growing intensity. "How many documents like this have you translated?" "Professionally? None since I finished my internship 3 years ago." Emily held his gaze. "But I've continued studying on my own." The exchange was interrupted by Victoria Matthews's arrival, who stopped short upon finding the cleaner sitting across from the CEO as if she were an equal. "Good morning," she greeted with evident confusion. "I didn't know we had a meeting so early." "Victoria, read this." Michael handed her the folder. "Especially the notes on clauses 7, 12, and 23. The financial director took the documents with a perplexed expression, alternating glances between Emily and her boss. As she read, her face reflected the same progression of emotions that Michael had experienced: disbelief, surprise, and finally, professional respect. "This is extremely detailed," she admitted, looking at Emily with new eyes. "They would have tied our hands in future negotiations." "How did you see it?" Emily merely shrugged. "It's my job. Or it was before." An uncomfortable silence settled in the room. Michael drummed his fingers on the table, making a decision. "I need you to be present at today's meeting," he said finally. "As an observer, I want you to take notes on any language subtleties we might be missing." "I have to clean the 28th floor at 3, Emily responded. "That can be arranged." Michael made a dismissive gesture. "Victoria, see that she's replaced today. We'll pay for the full day plus $1,000 for linguistic advisory during the meeting." Victoria seemed about to protest, but nodded curtly and left the office. Emily remained motionless, processing what had just happened. In less than 24 hours, she had gone from invisible to having a seat at an international negotiation. "Mr. Harrison," she said finally, "if I'm going to be in that meeting, I need to read all the background materials. I can't properly advise you without context." A smile appeared for the first time on Michael's lips. "You've got guts, Emily Parker," he commented, pronouncing her full name for the first time. "Victoria will provide you with everything you need. You have 3 hours to get up to speed." As she left the office, Emily felt a contradictory mixture of emotions. On one hand, the excitement of putting her knowledge into practice after so long. On the other, the uneasiness of entering a world she knew only through the floors she had scrubbed and the conversations she had overheard while becoming invisible behind her cleaning cart. What had begun as a simple improvised translation was evolving into something much more complex, and Emily couldn't help but wonder if she was prepared for the consequences. The Harrison Group's boardroom buzzed with the contained energy of 10 people, representing interests valued in hundreds of millions of dollars. At one end of the long glass table, the American delegation, 4 men in impeccable suits and a middle-aged woman with thick-framed glasses that didn't hide her penetrating gaze. At the other end, Michael flanked by his legal and financial teams, and in a corner, discreetly seated with a notepad, Emily. She had received a temporary visitor pass and a set of confidential documents she had devoured during the morning. Victoria had reluctantly provided her with a corporate tablet where she could send direct messages to Michael during the negotiation. Emily watched, fascinated, as the power choreography unfolded before her. The cordial smiles, the effusive greetings that concealed calculated strategies. Everything she had studied at university came to life in that room where sums were moved that she couldn't earn in a lifetime of cleaning. "Let's move on to the contract review," proposed Robert Thompson, the lead American negotiator, a man in his 50s with a perfectly trimmed mustache. "I understand you've reviewed our proposal." Michael smiled with studied confidence. "Of course. Although we'd like to propose some modifications, especially in the clauses related to future structural renovations." Emily observed the subtle change in Thompson's expression, a barely perceptible blink, a momentary tension at the corner of his lips. Quickly she wrote on the tablet, "Surprised he didn't expect you to detect this point." The negotiation advanced methodically, with proposals and counterproposals. Emily sent sporadic messages, alerting to linguistic or cultural nuances she captured in the Americans' responses. On one occasion, when Michael quoted verbatim a phrase from the original contract, Emily detected an exchange of glances between Thompson and his legal advisor. They're uncomfortable with the precision of the translation. They probably expected ambiguity. Mid-morning, during a break, Emily headed to the restroom. Upon exiting, she came face to face with Sarah Winters, the only woman on the American team. "So you're the star translator," commented Sarah with a markedly American accent. "Thompson is impressed, though he won't admit it." Emily maintained her neutral expression. "I'm just doing my job." "How long have you been working for Harrison?" Sarah asked with apparent casualness. "Since yesterday," Emily responded honestly, enjoying the surprise on the other woman's face. "I normally clean his offices." Sarah looked at her with renewed interest. "Fascinating. You should consider other professional options. Our group always looks for talent with fresh perspectives." Before Emily could respond, Victoria appeared in the hallway, her expression tense upon seeing the conversation. "They're waiting for you, Emily," she said with barely disguised urgency. Back in the room, the negotiation entered its critical phase. The contentious points had been identified, and now began the real tug-of-war. Emily observed with admiration how Michael handled the pressure, yielding on minor aspects to remain firm on the essentials. When Thompson suggested an apparently innocent change in the wording of a clause, Emily felt an internal alarm. Quickly she wrote, "Careful. In American legal jargon, this change would invalidate our previous guarantees." Michael read the message discreetly and, without missing a beat, proposed alternative wording. "We prefer to maintain clarity in all terms," he said, with a cordial smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ambiguity only benefits the lawyers, doesn't it, Thompson?" The American negotiator held his gaze for a moment before letting out a laugh that momentarily dissipated the tension. "Touché, Harrison. So I see you've done your homework." When the meeting finally concluded, past 5 in the afternoon, both parties had reached a preliminary agreement. A final session was scheduled for the next day, where the revised documents would be signed. As the Americans withdrew, Thompson briefly stopped next to Emily. "Congratulations," he said in English, with an accent that betrayed his New York origins. "It's not easy to detect those nuances if you haven't lived in the States." "Where did you learn?" "My thesis advisor was from Boston," Emily responded in the same language, "and I was lucky enough to do an exchange at Columbia." Thompson nodded appreciatively before following his team. When the room was empty, Michael dropped into his chair with a sigh of relief. "You were brilliant," he said, addressing Emily. "Those observations have saved us future headaches." Victoria, however, maintained her reserved expression. "I don't understand why Winters was so interested in talking to you," she commented suspiciously. Emily stored the tablet and stood up. "She offered me a job, more or less," she responded calmly. "It seems they value talent regardless of where it comes from." The comment, though not intended as a reproach, made Victoria look away uncomfortably. Michael observed the exchange with interest. "Emily, I need you to prepare the final version for tomorrow," he said, making a decision. "And I want you present at the signing." "I have a cleaning shift tomorrow," she responded automatically. "Not anymore," Michael looked at her directly. "At least not this week. I'm hiring you as a linguistic consultant until we close this deal. $2,000 for the 5 days, plus a bonus if we achieve the conditions we discussed today." Emily felt the floor move beneath her feet. $2,000 was more than she earned in 2 months of cleaning, working 6 days a week. I need to think about it, she said, surprising even herself with her response. Michael seemed genuinely disconcerted. Think about it? I'm offering you 5 times your current salary to do something you obviously enjoy. It's not that simple. Emily collected her notes. I have commitments, medical schedules to coordinate for my mother. I can't just... We can be flexible, Michael interrupted, looking at Victoria, who nodded reluctantly. Organize your schedule as you need, as long as the work gets done. Emily considered the offer. The opportunity was too good to refuse, but she feared the complications it might bring to her carefully structured life. I accept, she said finally, but with one condition. I want a formal contract as an independent consultant, not as an employee, and I need it to be clear that it's temporary. Victoria raised her eyebrows, clearly surprised by the young woman's audacity. Michael, however, smiled with something akin to admiration. Done, he extended his hand. Temporarily welcome to the team, Emily. As she shook the millionaire's hand, Emily was certain she had just crossed a threshold. What had begun as an impulsive opportunity to earn extra money had become something that could alter the course of her life. That night, as Emily explained the events to her mother, Margaret listened with a mixture of pride and concern. Be careful, honey, she gently warned. The world you're stepping into doesn't forgive naivety. I'm not naive, Mum, Emily responded. I know exactly what I'm worth and what I can offer, and for the first time in a long time, it seems someone else sees it too. As she prepared for bed, Emily received a message from David. Where were you today? I stopped by your work and they said you had taken the day off. Emily looked at the message for a long time before simply responding, I'll explain tomorrow. It's been a very long day. With that gesture, she deliberately postponed a conversation she knew would be difficult. David had always been protective, sometimes excessively so. She wasn't sure how he would react to this sudden change in her situation. As she sank into restless sleep, the image of Michael Harrison appeared in her mind, not as the intimidating businessman she had met, but as a man who, for a brief moment, had looked her in the eyes and seen something more than a cleaner. Opportunities rarely arrive at the perfect moment, she thought before falling asleep. The important thing is to recognize them when they appear, even if they come disguised as arrogance and $50 bills. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity for Emily. The negotiation with the Americans concluded satisfactorily, with Michael publicly congratulating her on her contribution. Victoria, initially reluctant, had begun to consult her opinion on documents in French and Italian, discovering that Emily's linguistic skills went far beyond English. The office they had temporarily assigned her was small but bright, with a view of Fifth Avenue. Emily still felt like an intruder every time she crossed the main lobby instead of using the service entrance. The same employees who had barely noticed her presence before now greeted her with curiosity, especially after seeing her leave meetings alongside Michael. This Friday morning, Emily was reviewing a set of emails in French when Michael appeared at her door. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, his usual authoritative tone slightly softened. Emily nodded, putting away the documents. "Please sit," she said, pointing to the only visitor chair in her tiny office. It was strange to see the imposing businessman in such a reduced space. "It's been a week since our initial agreement," Michael began, "and I must admit that you've exceeded all expectations." Emily waited, sensing there was more. "The thing is," he continued, showing a glimpse of uncommon discomfort for him, "we have a problem with our international communications department. The person who handled our relations with France has unexpectedly resigned." "I'm sorry to hear that," Emily responded cautiously. "We have an important meeting in Paris next week," explained Michael. "We need someone who not only masters the language, but understands the negotiation nuances that you've demonstrated such aptitude for." Emily immediately understood the direction of the conversation. "Mr. Harrison, I appreciate the confidence, but we agreed that my position was temporary." "And it would be," he insisted. "Just 3 days in Paris with all expenses paid and a $3,000 fee." Emily felt a knot in her stomach. The sum was tempting, especially considering that the experimental treatment doctors had suggested for her mother cost almost exactly that amount. But traveling meant leaving Margaret alone for 3 days, something she hadn't done since her illness began. "I can't leave my mother," she said firmly. "I'm sorry." Michael studied her with an indecipherable expression. "What if we could arrange that too?" he finally asked. Private nursing during your absence, in your own apartment. Emily looked at him in surprise. You would do that for 3 days of translation? No, Emily, Michael responded seriously. I would do it for the person who saved a $30 million contract last week. The silence that followed was laden with unspoken implications. Emily knew that accepting would mean crossing another line, stepping further into a world that until recently she had only observed from the margins. I need to consult with my mother, she said finally, and there's someone else I should consider as well. Michael's expression showed a flash of curiosity. Your partner? Emily nodded, uncomfortable with the sudden intrusion into her personal life. We have plans this weekend, she explained, without going into details about the growing tensions with David, who viewed her new work arrangement with distrust. Of course, Michael stood. Take the weekend to decide. But I need an answer by Monday morning. When she was alone, Emily allowed herself a moment to process the offer. Paris, the city where she had dreamed of studying before life took a different turn. $3,000 that could make a significant difference in her mother's treatment. And yet, a persistent feeling that each step took her further from the life she had built, from the people who were part of it. That afternoon, as she gathered her things to leave, she received an unexpected visit from Sarah Harrison, Michael's teenage daughter. At 17, Sarah was a juvenile, feminine version of her father, the same intensity in her gaze, the same elegant bearing, though softened by a typically teenage insecurity. "Excuse me," said the young woman from the doorway. "Are you Emily, the translator?" Emily nodded, surprised by the visit. "My father told me about you," Sarah continued, entering timidly. "He said you speak 5 languages. 4.5, actually," Emily corrected with a smile. "My German is pretty basic." Sarah seemed to gather courage before continuing. "I have a French exam next week and I'm having trouble with some grammar structures. Dad suggested that maybe you could, well, give me some advice." The request took Emily by surprise. Of all the possible scenarios, becoming a tutor to Michael Harrison's daughter hadn't been on her radar. "Sure," she responded after a moment, "though you should consult with your regular teacher." "He's a disaster," Sarah responded with teenage frankness. "He just repeats the same thing over and over, without explaining why the rules work that way." Emily recognized in the young woman's frustration her own experience as a student. She had always learned better by understanding the underlying principles, not by memorizing exceptions without context. "Do you have time now?" she asked, pointing to her desk. "I could show you some mnemonic tricks that helped me." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? That would be great." What Emily had planned as a brief 15-minute session extended to almost an hour. Sarah proved to be an avid student, quickly absorbing concepts when presented in a logical manner. Emily rediscovered the pleasure of teaching, something she had enjoyed during her university years when she gave private lessons to supplement her income. They were so absorbed that they didn't notice Michael at the door, observing them with an indecipherable expression. "Sarah," he said finally, alerting both to his presence. "I didn't know you were here." The young woman hurriedly gathered her notes. "Emily was helping me with French, Dad. It's incredible how she explains things." A shadow of surprise crossed Michael's face. "Is it? You've been complaining for months that no one can explain this to you." "Because no one had done it right," Sarah responded, with the brutal honesty typical of her age. "Emily makes it easy." The businessman looked at Emily with renewed interest. "I didn't know you also taught." "I used to at university," explained Emily, putting away her things. "To pay for books." Sarah intervened enthusiastically. "Dad, could Emily give me regular lessons, please?" The request created a moment of tension. Emily saw the indecision on Michael's face, the internal struggle between the businessman who saw everything in terms of efficiency and the father who wanted the best for his daughter. "That would depend on Emily," he finally responded, "and her other responsibilities." The exchange was interrupted by the arrival of Jennifer, Michael's current wife and Sarah's stepmother. 15 years younger than her husband, Jennifer combined obvious beauty with a coldness that Emily had perceived in their brief previous encounters. "There you are," she said, addressing Sarah with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've been looking for you everywhere. We have an appointment with the designer for your graduation dress." Her gaze fell on Emily, evaluating her with an intensity that was uncomfortable. "And you are?" Emily Parker, linguistic consultant, she introduced herself, extending a hand that Jennifer briefly shook. Emily was helping Sarah with her French, explained Michael. Jennifer arched a perfectly lined eyebrow. Isn't that what we pay a fortune in private tutors for? None of them explain as well as she does, insisted Sarah, provoking an irritated gesture from her stepmother. Well, we're in a hurry now, Jennifer concluded. The explanation will have to wait. As Sarah said goodbye with evident reluctance, Emily caught an exchange of glances between Michael and Jennifer that suggested a pending conversation. She wondered, not for the first time, what kind of family dynamic she was inadvertently becoming involved in. When she finally left the building, Emily found David waiting on the sidewalk. His expression, a mixture of concern and reproach, indicated that the postponed conversation could no longer wait. "We need to talk," he said by way of greeting. Emily nodded, mentally preparing herself for what she knew would be a difficult encounter. The weekend she had planned as a respite now loomed as a turning point in multiple aspects of her life. As they walked in silence toward a nearby cafe, Emily couldn't help thinking about the Paris offer and how, in just 1 week, her world had expanded and complicated in ways she never would have anticipated when she uttered those impulsive words. "I'll translate it for $500. The cafe was crowded with office workers celebrating the start of the weekend. Emily and David found a secluded table in a corner, the murmur of others' conversations providing an illusion of privacy. "You look different," David commented after an initial silence, studying her face as if looking for something lost. "More tired," suggested Emily. "I was going to say alive," he responded with a tentative smile. "There's an energy in you that I haven't seen in a long time." Emily stirred her coffee, unsure how to interpret the comment. "It's been an intense week." David nodded, his expression becoming more serious. "I'm worried about you, Emily. This sudden change, this millionaire offering you jobs, I know Harrison's reputation." "And what is it?" Emily asked, suddenly defensive. "He's a corporate predator," David responded without hesitation. "He uses people and then discards them. The papers are full of stories about how he's crushed competitors, partners, even friends." Emily remained silent, remembering the determination in Michael's eyes during negotiations, the way he had maneuvered to get exactly what he wanted. "I'm not naive, David," she finally said. "I know perfectly well who I'm working for." "And why do you do it?" he insisted. "For 3 years you've refused to look for work as a translator because the hours wouldn't allow you to care for your mother. What's changed?" The question touched a sensitive point. Emily had been avoiding asking herself the same thing. "The difference is that here I can set my terms," she responded after a moment. "I work as an independent consultant, not as an employee. I organize my own schedule." David looked at her skeptically. "And you think that will last? That a man like Harrison will respect your boundaries when they conflict with his interests?" Emily felt a twinge of irritation. "Why can't you just be happy for me? For the first time in years, I'm using my training, doing something I enjoy. And I am happy for you, Emily, truly." David took her hand across the table. "I just fear that this world you're stepping into will change you, that it will take you away from what really matters." "From you?" she asked directly. David seemed surprised by her frankness. "From us, yes. From the plans we made." Emily let out a tired sigh. The plans David referred to, an eventual marriage, perhaps children, a quiet middle-class life in the neighborhood, had always been more his than hers. "I need to tell you something," she said, changing the subject. "They've offered me to go to Paris next week for an important negotiation." The news fell like a stone between them. "Paris?" David repeated incredulously. "And your mother?" "Harrison has offered to pay for private nursing during my absence," explained Emily, "and the money I would earn could cover a large part of the experimental treatment that Dr. Thompson recommended." David remained silent, processing the information. "Have you already accepted?" "I wanted to talk to you first," she responded honestly. "I know we had plans for next weekend. The anniversary of their first meeting, a tradition that David especially valued. Our celebration can wait," he said finally, with a generosity that made Emily feel guilty about her secret relief. "Margaret's health is more important." Emily squeezed his hand gratefully. "Thank you for understanding." As they returned to Emily's apartment, the conversation drifted to lighter topics. David's students, the latest neighborhood events, a normalcy that Emily welcomed after a week of constant changes. Upon arriving home, they found Margaret preparing dinner, her face showing signs of fatigue but a determined gleam in her eyes. "How was your day, sweetie?" she asked, hugging Emily. "David, it's lovely to see you." During dinner, Emily explained the Paris offer. Margaret listened attentively, her expression changing from concern to pragmatism. "If they can guarantee that I'll have someone competent here, you should go," she said finally. "I can't keep organizing your entire life around me." "You're my mother," Emily responded simply. Margaret exchanged a look with David. "And you're young and brilliant. I don't want to be the reason you don't take opportunities." The conversation was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Emily was surprised to see Michael's name on the screen. "Hello?" "Emily. Sorry for the Friday night call." Michael's voice sounded different, less formal. "Sarah hasn't stopped talking about your session today. I was wondering if you would consider giving her regular lessons. I would pay, of course, at your usual rate." Emily caught David's questioning look. "I'm flattered by the request, Mr. Harrison, but I would have to think about it. My schedules are already quite complicated." "Of course," Michael responded. "Could you communicate your decision along with the answer about Paris? By the way, Sarah has asked me to invite you to dinner tomorrow. Apparently, she wants to show you her French essay before submitting it on Monday." The invitation took Emily completely by surprise. "Dinner? At your house?" "Yes, nothing formal," Michael assured. "Just family. At 8, if that works for you." Emily looked at David and Margaret, who were following her conversation with evident curiosity. "I would have to check my plans," she responded cautiously. "Of course, let me know," Michael paused. "And Emily, I want you to know that Sarah doesn't normally connect like this with her teachers. You have a special gift for teaching." After hanging up, Emily explained the situation. David's expression darkened. "Now he also wants you to be a private tutor for his daughter?" he asked incredulously. "What's next, pet sitter?" "David," Margaret intervened with gentle but firm authority. "That's not fair." "No, it's not," he responded, rising from the table. "Excuse me, I need some air." When the door closed behind him, Margaret looked at her daughter with concern. "He's afraid of losing you," she said simply. "Of you discovering a world where he has no place." Emily ran a hand over her tired face. "We're the same as always, Mom. A week as a consultant hasn't transformed me into another person." Margaret smiled wisely. "Change rarely announces its arrival, dear. You simply discover one day that you're no longer who you used to be." That night, as she tried to fall asleep, Emily reflected on her mother's words. Was she changing, or simply reclaiming parts of herself that she had relegated due to external circumstances? Her phone vibrated with a message from David. "I'm sorry for my reaction. I love you and support you always. You should go to that dinner and to Paris. We'll talk tomorrow." Emily responded with a simple thank you, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. David was a good man, loyal and steady. But lately, those same qualities she had once found comforting were beginning to feel like an anchor tying her to a limited version of herself. Before sleeping, she sent a message to Michael accepting the dinner invitation, aware that she was entering unknown territory. As sleep overtook her, the image of the imposing Harrison mansion, which she knew only from photographs in society magazines, mixed in her mind with the memory of her mother's chapped hands and David's hurt expression. Two worlds colliding, and she caught in the impact. The Harrison residence, an elegant mansion in the Upper East Side, proved less intimidating and more welcoming than Emily had imagined. Certainly luxurious with its expansive gardens and discreet staff, but decorated with a sober taste that reflected class rather than ostentation. Emily, dressed in the best her limited wardrobe allowed, a simple black dress her cousin had lent her for special occasions, was greeted by an enthusiastic Sarah. "You came," exclaimed the young woman leading her inside. "I've been working all morning on that essay I mentioned." Dinner was served in a more intimate dining room than the formal one Emily had glimpsed in passing. To her surprise, only Michael, Sarah, and herself were present. Jennifer, according to Michael's brief explanation, had a prior commitment. "Actually, she cancelled when she found out you were coming," confessed Sarah with the raw frankness of adolescence, provoking a warning look from her father. "What? It's the truth." She said she didn't think it was appropriate to dine with the cleaning lady. Emily felt a flush of discomfort, but Michael quickly intervened. My wife is sometimes traditional in her perspectives, he offered as an apology. I hope you're not offended. Not at all, Emily responded with dignity. In fact, I understand her point of view. This situation is unconventional. Dinner proceeded with surprising naturalness. Sarah dominated much of the conversation, jumping from topic to topic with the enthusiasm typical of her age. Her university plans. She wanted to study international relations in Boston. Her frustration with the traditional educational system. Her dreams of working in international organizations. Exactly what I wanted at your age, Emily commented without thinking. And what happened? Asked Sarah, with genuine curiosity. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Michael observed Emily with interest, as if he too was waiting for the answer. Life, Emily finally responded with a resigned smile. Circumstances, choices, commitments. One day you're planning your future, and the next you're making decisions you never anticipated. But now you're working in your field again, aren't you? Sarah insisted. Temporarily, Emily qualified, avoiding Michael's gaze. After dinner, while Sarah went to fetch her essay, Emily found herself alone with Michael on the terrace overlooking the illuminated garden. You have a beautiful home, she commented, to say something. Too big for two people, he responded, pouring himself a glass of wine. After divorcing my first wife, I should have looked for something smaller. Sarah's mother? Asked Emily, accepting the glass he offered. Michael nodded. She moved to Los Angeles 5 years ago. She has another family now, he paused. Sarah visits her twice a year. Emily perceived an old but unhealed pain in his voice. It was strange to see this more vulnerable facet of the relentless businessman. Sarah is an extraordinary young woman, she offered sincerely. Intelligent, curious, determined. A genuine smile illuminated Michael's face. She takes after you in that. The compliment, unexpected and apparently sincere, left Emily momentarily speechless. Michael seemed equally surprised by his own frankness. What I mean, he clarified, recovering his usual composure, is that I see in you the same determination I try to foster in my daughter. I found it, announced Sarah, appearing with several printed pages. Please be brutally honest, my teacher is too lenient. The next hour passed reviewing Sarah's work, which proved surprisingly good in content though, with predictable grammatical errors. Emily pointed out areas for improvement, explaining patterns that would facilitate learning beyond this specific essay. When she finally said goodbye, past 11, Michael insisted his driver take her home. I've decided to accept the Paris offer, Emily informed him as they walked to the door. If it's still available. Of course, he responded with evident satisfaction. I'll send you the details tomorrow. And about Sarah's lessons? Emily hesitated. She had greatly enjoyed helping the young woman, recognizing in her the same passion for languages she herself had had at her age. Once a week, she proposed. Saturday mornings, so as not to interfere with my other commitments. Michael extended his hand to seal the agreement. My daughter is lucky to have you as a mentor, he said, with a sincerity that Emily found disconcerting. Good night, Emily. During the ride home in the luxurious car with driver, Emily reflected on the evening. The dynamic between Michael and Sarah had been revealing. Beneath the facade of authority, she had seen a father genuinely concerned about his daughter's future. And Jennifer's deliberate absence raised questions about the stability of that marriage that Emily preferred not to explore. Upon arriving at her building, Emily was surprised to find David waiting at the entrance. His expression was a mixture of concern and something deeper that she couldn't identify. How was dinner with the rich and famous? He asked, trying to maintain a light tone. Emily sat next to him on the steps. Different than I expected, she responded honestly. Less formal, more human. David nodded slowly. I brought this for you, he said, handing her a small package. I was going to give it to you on our anniversary next week, but since you'll be in Paris... Emily opened the wrapping carefully, revealing a delicate silver bracelet with a small feather charm. It's beautiful, she murmured, genuinely moved. To remind you of who you really are, explained David, helping her put it on. A storyteller, not just a translator of others' words. The comment, though well-intentioned, provoked a twinge of irritation in Emily. Did David also see her current work as something inferior to her youthful literary aspirations? Thank you, she said simply. deciding not to voice that thought. As they climbed the stairs to her apartment, Emily felt the weight of the bracelet on her wrist, a beautiful gesture of love, but also a subtle reminder of expectations, of an image of her that perhaps no longer fit who she was becoming. That night, as she prepared a small suitcase for Paris, Emily found among her things an old university notebook. Leafing through it, she discovered notes from her simultaneous interpretation classes, translation exercises, dreams jotted in the margins. A version of herself she had gradually abandoned without realizing it, as life pulled her in another direction. Carefully, she placed the notebook in the suitcase. It was time to rediscover that Emily, who had once had the audacity to dream of interpreting at international conferences, perhaps Paris would be the first step in reconciling the woman she had been, the one she was now, and the one she might become. David's bracelet gleamed on her wrist under the bedside light. Emily contemplated it for a long time before turning off the lamp, wondering if it was possible to preserve her past, while moving toward a future she was only beginning to glimpse. "We can't always choose the doors that open for us," she thought as she sank into sleep. "But we do decide which ones we walk through, and what we take with us as we cross the threshold." Paris welcomed Emily with a persistent drizzle that blurred the contours of the city, giving it a melancholy and romantic aspect in equal parts. From the window of her room in an elegant hotel near the Champs-Élysées, she contemplated the diffuse lights of the city she had so often imagined visiting under very different circumstances. The first day of negotiations had been intense but productive. The French company, specialized in sustainable technology for buildings, was interested in a strategic alliance with the Harrison Group to expand into the American market. Emily had not only translated and interpreted, but had captured cultural subtleties that might have gone unnoticed even by experienced translators. "You were brilliant," Michael had commented as they returned to the hotel. "The way you handled that comment about flexible deadlines probably saved us months of misunderstandings." Now, as she unfolded the dress she would wear for the business dinner that night, Emily felt a mixture of professional satisfaction and a strange nostalgia. This trip represented everything she had dreamed of during her university years: traveling, using her linguistic knowledge in international negotiations, feeling valued for her intellect. And yet, the shadow of her life in New York accompanied her. She had called her mother that morning. The nurse hired by Michael seemed competent and kind, but Margaret sounded tired. David had barely responded to her messages, a silence that spoke louder than any words. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she responded, expecting some hotel employee with the ironing service she had requested. To her surprise, it was Michael who entered, still in his meeting suit, though he had removed his tie and had the collar of his shirt unbuttoned, giving him a more accessible appearance than usual. "Sorry for the intrusion," he said, remaining on the threshold. "I just wanted to confirm the details for dinner. The car will pick us up at 8. Emily nodded, suddenly conscious of her informal appearance in jeans and a simple T-shirt. "I'll be ready." Michael seemed to want to say something more but hesitated, an unusual behavior in a man normally so decisive. "Is something wrong?" Emily asked. "The French have suggested a change of plans for tomorrow," he explained finally. "They want to show us their new factory on the outskirts. It means leaving early and returning late." "No problem," Emily responded. "That's what I'm here for." "It also means we couldn't return to New York tomorrow night as planned," Michael continued. "We would have to stay an extra day." Emily felt a twinge of concern. "My mother—" "I've already arranged to extend the nursing service," Michael interrupted. "I just wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable with the change of plans." The consideration surprised her. In the 2 weeks she had been working for him, Emily had discovered that beneath his relentless exterior, Michael occasionally showed glimpses of an unexpected sensitivity. "Thank you for thinking of that," she said sincerely. Michael nodded, apparently uncomfortable with the gratitude. "It's the least I can do considering how much you're contributing to these negotiations." He paused. "I spoke with Sarah today. She's eager to start her lessons with you." The mention of the young woman brought a smile to Emily's face. "She's a very promising student." "Too smart for her own good, I'd say," Michael responded with barely disguised pride. "She reminds me of myself at her age, though with better manners." The confidence, unusually personal, created a moment of closeness that neither seemed to know how to handle. "See you in the lobby at 8. Michael finally said, retreating toward the door. So you don't need to dress too formally. The French appreciate discreet elegance. When she was alone, Emily allowed herself a moment of reflection. The dynamic between her and Michael had been subtly evolving, from initial disdain to professional respect, and now toward something more difficult to define. Not exactly friendship, but a growing comfort in each other's presence, a mutual recognition of capabilities that went beyond the employer-employee relationship. The dinner proved less rigid than Emily had anticipated. The French executives, impressed by her command of the language and her knowledge of the local culture, treated her as an integral part of the negotiating team, not as a mere translator. Michael, for his part, seemed proud to present her as his linguistic and cultural advisor, a title Emily had never heard before but found strangely satisfying. When they returned to the hotel past midnight, Emily was surprised to find a message from David. "Can we talk? It's important." With the time difference, it still wasn't too late in New York. Emily hesitated a moment before dialing his number. "Emily." David's voice sounded tense. "I didn't expect you to call now." "Your message seemed urgent," she responded, sitting on the hotel bed. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them before David spoke. "I've been offered a position in Seattle," he finally said. "1 year teaching in a pilot alternative education program. It's the opportunity I've always been looking for." The news fell on Emily like a bucket of cold water. David had been talking for years about this type of program, criticizing the traditional educational system in which he felt trapped. "That's wonderful, David," she said sincerely. "You should accept it." Another silence. "I would have to leave in 2 weeks," he continued, "and stay there at least until next summer." The implication hung between them, not expressed, but palpable. Their relationship, already strained by the recent changes in Emily's life, would hardly survive the distance. "I think you should accept," Emily repeated with a soft voice. "It's what you've always wanted." "And you?" David asked. "What have you always wanted, Emily?" The question caught her off guard. What had she really wanted, beyond the circumstances that had defined her choices in recent years? "I want to be free to discover that," she finally responded, surprising even herself with the honesty of her words. The silence that followed had a different weight, as if both recognized they had just crossed a point of no return. "When you get back from Paris," David began. "We'll talk," Emily completed, calmly and honestly. "I'll always love you, you know." David's voice broke slightly. "No matter what happens." "I know," she responded, feeling a knot in her throat. "Me too." After hanging up, Emily remained for a long time looking out the window at the lights of Paris. It was strange how life could change so quickly. David, for so long her stable anchor, was now also in motion, following his own path. It was liberating and frightening in equal parts. A soft knock on the door startled her. Upon opening, she found Michael with 2 glasses and a bottle of champagne. "Sorry for the hour," he said, appearing almost shy. "I just received confirmation. The French have accepted our main conditions. I thought we could toast to success." Emily hesitated for a moment. The situation, her boss, at the door of her hotel room late at night, clearly crossed professional boundaries. And yet, after the conversation with David, she felt a strange need for company, to celebrate small triumphs amid uncertainties. "Come in," she said, opening the door wider. "But just 1 glass. We have to get up early tomorrow." Michael entered, maintaining a respectful distance as he served the champagne. Emily noticed he had changed from his suit into more casual clothes, a detail that humanized the always impeccable businessman. "To the most unlikely team in New York," he proposed, raising his glass. Emily smiled, gently touching her glass to his. "To unexpected opportunities." They drank in a comfortable silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Finally, Michael spoke. "May I ask you a personal question?" Emily nodded cautiously. "Are you happy, Emily, with your life, your choices?" The question, so similar to David's but from a completely different perspective, left her momentarily speechless. "I'm learning to be," she finally responded. "To recognize what I want, not just what I should do." Michael nodded, as if the answer confirmed something he already suspected. "I'm in that process too," he confessed, looking out the window at the illuminated city. "After my divorce, I immersed myself in work until I almost forgot why I was doing it. It was Sarah who made me realize. Realize what? Emily asked, genuinely interested. That I was building an empire that no one wanted to inherit, he responded with a sad smile. Sarah has no interest in real estate. She wants to change the world, not own it. Sounds familiar, Emily commented, thinking of her own youthful dreams. What I'm trying to say, Michael continued, his voice adopting a more personal tone, is that I admire you, Emily. The way you balance your responsibilities without losing sight of your own desires. It's inspiring. The compliment, so unexpected and apparently sincere, left Emily speechless. For a moment the roles were reversed. It wasn't the powerful businessman and the temporary employee, but two people recognizing each other at a fundamentally human level. The moment was broken when Emily's phone vibrated with a message. She instinctively looked at it. It was her mother, informing that she was fine but tired after a therapy session. I need to respond, she apologized. Of course. Michael left his glass and headed for the door. Rest, tomorrow will be a long day. Before leaving, he paused. Emily, when we return to New York, I'd like to discuss something with you. A more permanent proposal. Without waiting for a response, he gently closed the door, leaving Emily with a sensation of vertigo that she couldn't attribute entirely to the champagne. That night, as she tried to fall asleep in the luxurious bed of the Parisian hotel, Emily felt she was on the edge of a precipice. All the certainties that had defined her life, her relationship with David, her identity as her mother's caretaker, even her resigned acceptance of jobs below her capabilities, were simultaneously crumbling. And amid the uncertainty, a truth was beginning to emerge. Perhaps the real Emily, the one who had been buried under years of obligations and concessions, was finally finding her voice. Sometimes, she thought before falling asleep, we need to distance ourselves from everything familiar to remember who we really are. The return to New York 3 days later was marked by a comfortable silence between Emily and Michael. The trip to Paris had established between them a professional complicity that transcended the circumstances of their first encounter. The success of the negotiations had exceeded all expectations, with the French signing a collaboration agreement that opened new markets for both companies. As the private plane, an extravagance that Emily still found disconcerting, began its descent toward New York, Michael finally addressed the topic he had left pending. I've been thinking about our organizational structure, he began, closing his laptop. The group is growing internationally faster than anticipated, and we need to strengthen our multilingual communication capacity. Emily nodded, waiting for him to continue. I want to create an international relations department, explained Michael. A team dedicated to facilitating our global operations, ensuring that nothing is lost in translation, literally or culturally. Sounds logical, Emily commented, beginning to sense where the conversation was heading. I want you to lead it, Michael proposed directly. As Director of International Relations, reporting directly to me. Despite having anticipated something similar, the concrete offer left Emily momentarily speechless. The magnitude of the leap, from cleaner to director in just a month, was dizzying. Michael, she began, unsure how to respond. Before you say anything, he interrupted, I want you to know that this isn't a whim or a favor. It's a business decision. You've demonstrated capabilities that we desperately need. I have no experience leading teams, Emily argued. But you have something more valuable. Perspective, Michael responded with conviction. How you see things that the rest of us trapped in our corporate bubble miss. Emily looked out the window, processing the proposal. The salary Michael had mentioned was several times higher than anything she had earned before, enough to guarantee the best medical treatment for her mother and free her from immediate financial concerns. But it wasn't just the money that tempted her. It was the opportunity to fully utilize her capabilities, to build something from scratch, to recover the professional trajectory she had forcibly abandoned years ago. I need to think about it, she said finally. It's a very big change. Michael nodded, respecting her caution. Of course. Take the time you need. He paused. But I'd like to introduce you to someone before you make your decision. Do you have plans for this afternoon? Upon landing, a car was waiting to take them directly to a private clinic on the outskirts of New York. Emily followed Michael with curiosity through immaculate corridors until they reached the office of a distinguished-looking doctor. Dr. Thompson, Michael greeted, thank you for receiving us on such short notice. "It's always a pleasure, Mr. Harrison," responded the doctor, then directing his attention to Emily. "You must be Ms. Parker. I've been reviewing your mother's history." Emily looked at Michael with surprise and a flash of indignation. "You shared my mother's medical information without my consent." "Only what was already in her application for the experimental treatment," Michael defended himself. "I thought Dr. Thompson might have a valuable perspective." The doctor, perceiving the tension, intervened diplomatically. "Ms. Parker, I understand your concern, but I assure you that my only interest is professional. Your mother presents a case that fits perfectly into a new treatment protocol we're developing." Gradually, Emily understood what Michael had arranged. Dr. Thompson was one of the leading researchers in innovative treatments for her mother's condition, and he was offering to include her in a promising clinical trial with all expenses covered by a foundation associated with the Harrison Group. "Why are you doing this?" Emily asked Michael directly when they were alone in the hallway after the consultation. "Because I can," he responded simply. "Because I have the resources and contacts to make a difference." "And if I refuse your job offer?" "Your mother's treatment is not conditioned on your professional decision," Michael clarified firmly. "They are completely separate things." Emily studied him, trying to discern his real motivations. "No one does something like this without expecting something in return," she finally said. Michael held her gaze. "Perhaps I've learned that there are satisfactions that money can't buy," he responded with unusual vulnerability. "Like seeing someone regain hope." The comment hung suspended between them, laden with implications that neither was prepared to fully explore. Finally, Emily nodded, at least temporarily accepting the explanation. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll talk to my mother about the treatment." That night, as Emily explained the events to Margaret, she observed how her mother's face transformed with an emotion she hadn't seen in years: genuine hope. "It's an extraordinary opportunity for you, dear," said Margaret, squeezing her daughter's hand. "And not just for the money." "Everything is happening so fast," Emily confessed. "Sometimes I feel like I'm losing control of my own life." Margaret smiled wisely. "Or perhaps for the first time in a long time you're regaining it." That night, Emily called David. The conversation was painful but necessary. Both recognized that their paths were diverging, not for lack of love, but because they were finally following the personal ambitions they had postponed. "You'll always be special to me," said Emily, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "Part of who I am today I owe to you, to your support during the most difficult moments." "And I'll always be proud of you," responded David, his voice broken with emotion. "Of the extraordinary woman I always knew you were, even when you doubted it." They said goodbye not as lovers, but as two people who had shared a significant stretch of the road and now had to continue on separate paths. The next day, Emily presented herself at Michael's office with a decision made. "I accept the position," she said without preamble, "but with conditions." Michael invited her to sit, genuinely intrigued. "I'm listening." "I want to finish my doctorate," explained Emily. "I left it halfway when my mother fell ill. I'll need flexibility to attend tutorials and eventually defend my thesis." "Of course," Michael nodded. "What else?" "I want real autonomy to form my team," Emily continued. "And an adequate budget to implement linguistic training programs for existing personnel." Michael smiled, clearly impressed by her approach. "Anything else?" Emily looked at him directly, without wavering. "Yes. I want it to be clear in writing that my position is not linked to any personal favor. I'll work for the Harrison Group because I believe in the project and in my capabilities to develop it, not out of gratitude or personal commitment." Michael's smile faded, replaced by an expression of respect. "I'll draft that clause myself," he promised, "though it saddens me that you believe it's necessary to protect yourself from my intentions." "It's not personal," Emily clarified. "It's professional. If I'm going to do this, I need to do it on my own terms." Michael observed her for a long time before nodding slowly. "You know, when you offered to translate that document for $500, I thought it was simply audacity," he confessed. "Now I understand it was dignity. You've never allowed your circumstances to define your worth." The comment touched something deep in Emily, a recognition that few people had been able to articulate. "We have a deal then," she said, extending her hand. "We do, Director Parker," Michael responded, shaking it. In the following weeks, Emily's life underwent a radical transformation. Her mother began the new treatment with promising preliminary results. Emily rented a larger, more accessible apartment, though she refused to move to a more exclusive area, as Michael had suggested, preferring to remain close to her neighborhood and roots. She formed a small but efficient team for the new department, including James, a former university classmate who had recently returned from Brussels and brought valuable experience in European institutions. The French lessons with Sarah continued, evolving into broad discussions about international culture and diplomacy that both greatly enjoyed. The young woman saw in Emily a role model, someone who had overcome obstacles without compromising her essential values. Jennifer, however, maintained a cold distance, observing with distrust Emily's growing influence in the company and in her stepdaughter's life. "I don't know what game you're playing," she commented one afternoon, encountering her casually in the elevator. "But Michael has a history of passing enthusiasms, both in business and personally." Emily maintained her composure. "I'm not playing any game, Mrs. Harrison. I'm just doing my job." "We'll see," Jennifer responded with a tense smile. "Time will tell." The comment, though intended to be discouraging, had the opposite effect on Emily. It reminded her that, regardless of how she had reached this position, it now depended on her to demonstrate her worth not through impulsive gestures, but through consistent work and tangible results. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in her office, no longer the initial cubicle but an appropriate office for her new position, she received an unexpected visit from Rebecca, the international executive she had met during the negotiations with the Americans. "I was passing through New York and thought I'd say hello," explained Rebecca with her characteristic accent. "Besides, I was curious to see what had become of that fascinating cleaner who spoke English like a diplomat." Emily smiled, appreciating the woman's frankness. "As you can see, life takes unexpected turns." "Certainly," Rebecca nodded, observing the office with approval. "Though I must say I'm not completely surprised. I recognized your potential from the first moment." The conversation drifted to professional topics, with Rebecca suggesting possible collaborations between their companies that would benefit both parties. Upon saying goodbye, she handed Emily a personal card. "In case you ever get tired of the New York hustle and want to try European air," she said with a wink. "There are always opportunities for talents like yours." Emily thanked her for the gesture, though without any real intention of considering it. Just a month into her new position, she already felt she was building something significant, something that went beyond translating words. She was building bridges between cultures, facilitating understandings that transcended linguistic barriers. That night, as she walked down Fifth Avenue after a long day, Emily paused before her reflection in a storefront. The woman looking back at her seemed simultaneously familiar and strange. The same face, but with a new confidence in her posture, a serenity that came from having reconnected with her true potential. Words have power, she reflected as she resumed her path. Not just to communicate, but to transform. A simple phrase, "I'll translate it for $500, can open doors we didn't even know existed." With that certainty, Emily continued toward her home, aware that the journey she had begun was only beginning, and that the real challenge wasn't reaching a position, but remaining true to herself once achieved. Fall gave way to winter, and with it came the first major crisis for Emily's department. A leak of internal Harrison Group documents to a German competitor threatened to unravel months of strategic negotiations. The translation of these documents, evidently done by a professional with privileged access, revealed confidential details about the company's European expansion strategy. Emily was urgently summoned to Michael's office on a Friday afternoon. She found him pale with fury, pacing like a caged lion while Victoria and two members of the legal team observed in tense silence. "Someone has betrayed us," he declared without preamble, showing her the leaked documents. "And, judging by the precision of the translations, I'd bet it's someone from your department." The comment, launched with the impulsivity of anger, hit Emily like a slap. She took the documents with trembling hands, examining the German translation. Indeed, the work was impeccable, with a deep knowledge not only of the language, but of the specific terminology of the sector. "I need time to analyze this," she said, maintaining her professionalism despite the knot in her throat. "But I assure you, I'll investigate thoroughly." "You have until Monday," Michael responded with a cutting tone. By then, I want to know who the mole is and how the hell they accessed information classified as Level A. Emily nodded, aware of the gravity of the situation. In the 3 months she had been leading her department, she had established strict confidentiality protocols, but clearly something had failed. The trust that had cost her so much to gain now hung by a thread. Throughout the weekend, Emily worked tirelessly, analyzing the leaked documents, reviewing access records, discreetly interviewing members of her team. The situation was complicated because the original documents had passed through several hands before reaching her department for translation. On Sunday night, exhausted but determined, she had a revelation while closely examining the linguistic peculiarities of the German translation. There were patterns, lexical and structural choices that seemed familiar to her. With growing certainty, she searched the department's historical archives, even those predating her arrival, and there, in translations from almost 2 years ago, she found the same unmistakable style. Lawrence Bennett, the former official translator who had been displaced after Emily's arrival and who continued working for the company in a lesser position. In the early hours of Monday, Emily presented herself at Michael's office with a detailed report. She found the businessman visibly exhausted, as if he too had spent the weekend without rest. "I have it," she announced, placing the folder on the desk. "And it's not from my department." Michael reviewed the report in silence, his expression transitioning from initial disbelief to recognition. "Bennett," he murmured. "I should have guessed." "He never got over his demotion. Technically, he still has access to sensitive documents," explained Emily, "but what concerns me isn't just the current leak, but what it implies. He could have been passing information to competitors for years." Michael closed the folder, his gaze meeting Emily's. "Good work," he acknowledged, a tone of implicit apology in his voice. "I'm sorry I doubted your team." "It was a logical suspicion," Emily conceded. "The question now is, how do we proceed?" The crisis was resolved discreetly. Bennett was confronted with the evidence and, after a brief denial, confessed to having sold information to competitors for years. He was immediately fired, with the threat of legal actions that would probably never materialize to avoid negative publicity. What Emily hadn't expected was the impact this episode would have on her relationship with Michael. The trust he had placed in her, briefly questioned and then restored with greater strength, established a new level of mutual respect. "You handled this with a professionalism that many veteran executives would envy," he commented to her one afternoon as they reviewed the new security measures implemented. "Loyalty isn't bought with salaries but with respect. Your team follows you because they believe in you." The compliment, delivered with sincerity, provoked in Emily a sensation of achievement more satisfying than any promotion or raise. As Christmas approached, the successes of Emily's department multiplied. She had established a language training program for executives that was receiving enthusiastic reception, and her cultural analyses prior to international negotiations had become an indispensable requirement for any foreign operation. However, not everything was professional triumph. Her relationship with Sarah had deepened, becoming a genuine friendship that transcended the French lessons. The young woman, about to graduate from high school, trusted Emily to speak about her hopes, fears, and aspirations in a way she couldn't do with her father or stepmother. "Jennifer thinks I should study business like Dad," she confided one afternoon as they walked through Central Park. "She says it would be natural, as if my life should be an extension of his." Emily listened, offering advice only when asked, aware of the delicate balance between supporting the young woman and not interfering in family matters. "And what does your father think?" she asked cautiously. "He says he'll support whatever I decide," Sarah responded with a sigh, "but I can see in his eyes that he secretly hopes I'll choose the path he's laid out. He doesn't want to pressure me, but he's afraid I'll make a mistake." "Fear often comes from love," Emily observed. "Parents fear for their children precisely because they love them." "You don't fear for me," Sarah replied, with the relentless logic of youth, "and I know you care about me." The comment touched Emily more than she expected. "Perhaps because my role is different," she explained. "I can see your potential without the weight of expectations." The relationship between Emily and Sarah didn't go unnoticed by Jennifer, whose resentment manifested in acid comments and hostile glances. The situation reached a critical point during a dinner at the Harrison mansion, to which Emily had been invited to discuss an upcoming business trip. Sarah told me you're encouraging her to study in Boston, Jennifer commented while dessert was being served, her tone deceptively casual. What a coincidence that it's precisely where you dreamed of studying. Emily maintained her composure, aware of Michael's attentive gaze. I've only shared my experience, she responded calmly. The decision is entirely hers. Of course, Jennifer smiled without warmth. Though I can't help but wonder if your advice is colored by your own frustrated ambitions. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Sarah looked mortified. Michael visibly tensed his jaw. Jennifer, he intervened with controlled voice, I think you're misinterpreting the situation. Am I? She insisted, looking directly at Emily. Isn't it true that your relationship with our daughter goes beyond simple language lessons? You've become a kind of role model. The word hung in the air, laden with implications. Emily then understood Jennifer's real fear, not that she was influencing Sarah, but that she was replacing her in her affection. I deeply admire Sarah, Emily responded with sincerity. Her intelligence, her sensitivity, her determination, qualities she has undoubtedly developed in a home that has provided her with both love and opportunities. The response, diplomatic but genuine, seemed to momentarily disconcert Jennifer. Michael took advantage of the pause to change the subject to the pending business trip, but the damage was done. The relaxed atmosphere of the dinner had vanished. Later, as Emily waited for her taxi, Michael joined her in the garden. I'm sorry about tonight, he said with evident discomfort. Jennifer can be protective. It's understandable, Emily responded. Perhaps I should distance myself a bit from Sarah. No, Michael's voice sounded firmer than he intended. Sarah needs people like you in her life. Female figures who demonstrate that intelligence and ambition aren't qualities to hide. The comment revealed much about his view of Jennifer, and Emily wondered, not for the first time, what kept that marriage together that seemed so devoid of emotional connection. Still, I should be more aware of boundaries, she insisted. Michael looked at her for a long time before speaking. You know, sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had met someone like you earlier, he finally said, his voice barely audible. Someone who valued substance over appearances. The comment, so close to a personal confession, created a moment of uncomfortable intimacy. Emily, feeling they were dangerously approaching a boundary she wasn't willing to cross, took a step back. My taxi is arriving, she said, pointing to the headlights approaching the driveway. We'll talk tomorrow about the details of the trip. Michael nodded, recovering his usual composure. Of course, good night, Emily. During the ride home, Emily reflected on the complexity of the situation she found herself in. What had begun as a professional opportunity had become a tangle of intertwined personal relationships. She genuinely appreciated Sarah, professionally respected Michael, and now had to navigate the turbulent waters of Jennifer's jealousy and her boss's possible romantic expectations. Upon arriving at her apartment, she found her mother awake, waiting for her with a cup of tea. It's late, Emily commented, surprised. I wanted to see you before going to bed, responded Margaret, studying her daughter's face. You look worried. Emily sat next to her, grateful for her mother's perspective, which had notably improved with the new treatment. Life was simpler when I just cleaned offices, she confessed with a tired smile. Now there are complications. Margaret nodded understandingly. Success always brings complexity, she observed. The important thing is that you don't lose yourself in it. How do I avoid that? By remembering who you really are, Margaret responded, squeezing her hand. Not the director, not the tutor, not the potential romantic interest of a married man. Just Emily, my daughter, the girl who dreamed of changing the world with words. The simplicity and wisdom of the advice touched something deep in Emily. Amid all the external changes, there existed an essential core that remained unchanged. Her values, her fundamental dreams, her integrity. That night, before sleeping, Emily made a decision. She would establish clearer boundaries, both with Sarah and with Michael. Her professional worth didn't depend on ambiguous personal relationships, and she wouldn't allow her integrity to be compromised by implicit expectations or misunderstandings. With that firm resolution, she fell asleep, ignoring that fate had prepared an unexpected turn that would test all her convictions and forever change the dynamic between her and the Harrisons. The New York winter was punishing the city with persistent rain when Emily received the call that would alter the course of events. It was Saturday morning. She had just returned from visiting her mother, who had been temporarily transferred to the hospital for routine tests related to her treatment. "Emily?" Sarah's voice sounded shaky. "I need your help." Something in her tone immediately alarmed Emily. "What's happening? Are you okay?" "I'm at Port Authority bus terminal," explained the young woman, her voice barely audible over the background noise. "I was going to take the bus to Boston to visit a friend, but I lost my ticket and wallet. I have no way to get home, and Dad and Jennifer are out of town." "Don't move," Emily responded without hesitation. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The rain was pouring when Emily arrived at the terminal. She found Sarah in a cafe, pale and visibly upset, though trying to maintain her composure. "I'm so sorry," the young woman apologized. "I didn't know who else to call." "You did the right thing," Emily reassured her, ordering 2 coffees. "Tell me exactly what happened." The story was simple. Sarah had arranged to meet a high school friend who now studied in Boston. Her parents had given her permission for the weekend trip, trusting her maturity. But somewhere between the taxi and the terminal, she had lost the small purse containing her ticket, money, and ID. "Dad would kill me if he knew I was so careless," she confessed, tears of frustration welling in her eyes, especially after insisting so much that I could travel alone. Emily considered the situation. The simplest thing would be to take Sarah back home and contact Michael or Jennifer, but she understood the young woman's dilemma. At 18, fighting for her independence, such a mistake could be perceived as confirmation that she wasn't yet ready for the freedom she yearned for. "Do you really want to go to Boston?" Emily asked. Sarah nodded vehemently. "Claire is waiting for me. We plan to visit the university where I want to study next year." Emily made an impulsive but carefully considered decision. "Okay, let's do this. I'll buy you a new ticket and lend you some money for the weekend," she proposed. "But promise me you'll be extremely careful and keep me informed of your arrival and movements." Sarah's eyes lit up. "You'd do that for me? Without telling Dad?" "Only if you promise to be responsible," Emily insisted, "and because I trust your judgment. Sometimes we all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them." The relief and gratitude on the young woman's face confirmed to Emily that she was making the right decision. She helped Sarah buy a new ticket, lent her enough money for the weekend, and even gave her her scarf to protect her from the Boston cold. "Remember our deal," she reminded as she accompanied her to the platform. "Message me when you arrive and every night before bed." "You're the best, Emily," Sarah responded, impulsively hugging her. "Someday I'll make it up to you. I promise." As she watched the bus depart, Emily felt a mixture of satisfaction at having helped and a slight uneasiness. She hadn't exactly lied to Michael, but she also hadn't informed him of an incident concerning his daughter. She consoled herself thinking she was respecting Sarah's autonomy, treating her as the young adult she was becoming, not as the child her father still saw in her. The weekend passed without incident. Sarah scrupulously fulfilled her promise, sending punctual messages that Emily responded to with practical advice and words of encouragement. The young woman returned Sunday afternoon, overflowing with enthusiasm for the university she had visited, and deeply grateful for the trust placed in her. "Don't tell Dad yet," she asked as Emily drove her back home. "I want to tell him myself when I'm sure of my decision." "It's your life and your choice," Emily responded. "But remember that although parents sometimes seem obstinate, they generally want the best for their children." What neither could foresee was that their little conspiracy would be discovered in the most unexpected way. Monday morning, Emily was urgently summoned to Michael's office. She found him unusually serious with an expression she couldn't interpret. "Close the door," he instructed when she entered, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. Emily obeyed, an uneasy presentiment forming inside her. "Any problem with the German project report?" she asked, assuming it was a professional matter. "This has nothing to do with work," Michael responded, rising to face her. "It's about Sarah." Emily's heart raced. Had something happened in Boston that the young woman hadn't told her? "Is she okay?" she asked with genuine concern. "Physically, yes," Michael responded. "But she lied to me. She lied to all of us." Emily remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "This weekend she wasn't with a high school friend as she led us to believe," Michael explained, his voice tense with contained emotion. "She was with a boy, a college student she met at a party last month." The revelation left Emily momentarily speechless. Sarah had lied to her too, using her as an unwitting accomplice in a much more significant deception. "I had no idea," she began, sincerely shocked. "I know," Michael interrupted, "because according to her, you helped her when she lost her ticket and money, an incident that conveniently never occurred." Emily felt the floor move beneath her feet. Sarah's elaborate story had been precisely that, a story. "Michael, she tried to explain. "I trusted you, Emily." The disappointment in his voice was palpable. "I opened the doors of my company, my home, my family to you, and this is how you repay me. By helping my daughter deceive me?" "It wasn't like that," Emily protested, regaining her composure. "Sarah called me distressed, told me she had lost her things. I believed her. I had no reason to doubt her." Michael studied her, as if evaluating the sincerity of her words. "And you didn't think you should inform me? That as a father I had the right to know my daughter was alone in a terminal, supposedly without money or identification." The question hit Emily with the force of its legitimacy. In her desire to respect Sarah's autonomy, she had underestimated the natural concern of a father. "You're right," she finally acknowledged. "I should have informed you. I'm sorry." The admission seemed to partially deflate Michael's anger. He dropped into his chair, suddenly exhausted. "Do you know how we discovered the truth?" he asked, his voice calmer but still hurt. "One of Jennifer's friends saw her in Boston, in a cafe, kissing this boy. He sent her a photo, thinking we knew." Emily closed her eyes, imagining the commotion this must have caused in the Harrison household. "I deeply regret it," she repeated. "My intention was never to facilitate a deception." "The problem, Emily, is that you crossed a line," Michael continued. "You acted as if you had authority over decisions concerning my daughter." "I didn't mean to usurp your place," Emily defended herself. "I was just trying to help her in what I believed was a genuine emergency." "And afterward, when she was sending you messages from Boston, didn't you find it strange that she didn't contact us at all?" Emily remained silent. That part was harder to justify. "I suppose I wanted to give her the space she was asking for," she finally admitted. "To treat her confidences with the respect they deserve. She's not your daughter, Emily." Michael's voice acquired a cutting edge. "No matter how much you care for her, you have no right to make decisions about her well-being." The words hurt more than Emily expected, not for their harshness, but for their fundamental truth. At some point, she had begun to see herself as a more significant figure in Sarah's life than she really was. "You're absolutely right," she acknowledged, maintaining her dignity despite the knot in her throat. "I made an error in judgment, and I sincerely regret it." Michael observed her for a long time, as if trying to reconcile the competent professional he knew with the person who had inadvertently facilitated his daughter's deception. "I need time to process this," he said finally, "to decide how to proceed." Emily nodded, understanding the implication. Her position, her relationship with the Harrison family, everything was now in question. "I understand," she responded, rising. "I'll be in my office if you need to talk more about this." As she headed to the door, Michael stopped her with one last question. "Is there anything else I should know? Any other confidence of Sarah's that you've considered not sharing?" Emily turned to face him. "No," she responded firmly. "And I want you to know that, despite my error in judgment in this case, I would never do anything that would put Sarah in danger. I care too much about her for that." Something in the sincerity of her words seemed to touch Michael, whose expression softened slightly. "I know," he admitted. "Perhaps that's the problem. We all love her too much, to the point of making mistakes trying to protect her or please her." With that shared reflection, Emily left the office, aware that she had reached a turning point. The consequences of her actions, however well-intentioned, were now beyond her control. During the following hours, Emily immersed herself in her work, trying to maintain concentration despite the uncertainty weighing on her. It wasn't until mid-afternoon when she received a message from Sarah, a simple but heartbreaking apology. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I never meant to get you in trouble. Please forgive me." Emily contemplated the message for a long time before responding. "I forgive you, Sarah. But remember that lies always have consequences, sometimes for people you never intended to hurt." As she sent the response, Emily reflected on how a simple decision, helping a young woman who apparently needed it, had triggered a crisis of trust that threatened to undo everything she had built in the last few months. "Perhaps," she thought with resignation, "this is the reminder I needed." That no matter how high you climb, we remain vulnerable to the most basically human errors. Trusting too much, assuming responsibilities that aren't ours, forgetting the boundaries that define our relationships. With that bitter but necessary lesson in mind, Emily prepared to face whatever came, willing to accept the consequences of her actions, but also determined to defend the integrity of her intentions. The following days passed in a limbo of professional uncertainty. Michael maintained a courteous but cold distance, limiting his interactions with Emily to what was strictly necessary. The rest of the company, sensitive to subtle changes in power dynamics, began to speculate about a possible fall from grace of the meteoric director. Emily faced the rumors with dignity, concentrating on her work and maintaining a discreet profile. Internally, however, she struggled with mixed feelings. Regret for her error in judgment, but also growing frustration at what she perceived as a disproportionate reaction to a fundamentally well-intentioned act. On Wednesday afternoon, while reviewing documents in her office, she received an unexpected visit. Sarah, pale but determined, appeared at her door. "May I come in?" she asked with a trembling voice. Emily nodded, surprised to see her at the company. "You shouldn't be here," she warned, aware of the possible repercussions. "Your father—" "My father needs to hear the truth," Sarah interrupted, sitting across from her. "The whole truth, and I've come to tell you first." Emily observed her cautiously, noting something new in the young woman, an adult determination that contrasted with her usual teenage impulsivity. "I'm listening." Sarah took a deep breath before beginning. "I lied about Boston. About everything," she confessed. "I didn't lose my ticket or my money. I deliberately used you to have a credible alibi." "Why me?" Emily asked, trying to understand. "Why involve me in something like this?" "Because I trusted you," Sarah responded with simplicity. "Because I knew you would believe me and help me without judging me." The explanation, in its sincere simplicity, touched something deep in Emily. Despite the deception, there was an implicit compliment in having been chosen as the person in whom Sarah placed such trust. "The boy," Emily began. "Kevin," Sarah completed. "He studies international relations in Boston. I met him during a university visit, not at a party like Dad thinks. We've been seeing each other secretly for 3 months. "Why the secrecy?" Emily pressed, genuinely curious. "Your father has always said he respects your decisions." Sarah let out a humorless laugh. "Dad respects my decisions as long as they fit with his vision of the world," she responded. "And Jennifer, well, she has her own plans for me, which coincidentally always involve sons of her high society friends." Emily listened in silence, beginning to understand the complexity of the situation and the pressures Sarah was under. Still, lying wasn't the solution, she pointed out gently. "Especially lying to me when I've tried to be a sincere support for you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I know, and I deeply regret it," her voice broke. "But I was desperate, Emily. Kevin represents everything I want in my life. Passion for the same issues that matter to me. Integrity, vision for the future. He's not the typical rich boy who only thinks about parties and luxury cars." "And what do you plan to do now?" Emily asked, moved despite her determination to maintain a certain emotional distance. "I'm going to talk to Dad," Sarah responded, wiping her tears with determination. "I'll tell him the whole truth. About Kevin, about my university plans, about who I really am and what I want to do with my life." "And what do you want exactly?" Sarah looked at her directly, her eyes suddenly clear and certain. "I want to study international cooperation, not business. I want to work in humanitarian organizations, not in the family business. And I want to do it in Boston, close to Kevin, but above all away from Jennifer's influence." The Declaration of Independence, expressed with the passion and conviction typical of youth, resonated with Emily. She remembered her own dreams at that age, before life redirected them along unexpected paths. "You know what hurts the most?" Sarah continued. "That because of me, because of my lies, Dad is punishing the only person who has really seen me for who I am, not for who they expect me to be." Emily understood that she was referring to herself and felt a wave of contradictory emotion. Sadness for the situation, pride at having meant so much to the young woman, concern for the immediate future. "Your father is hurt," she explained gently, "not so much by what you did, but by feeling that he lost your trust." "I know," Sarah nodded. "That's why I'm going to talk to him tonight, and I want you to be present." The request took Emily completely by surprise. "Sarah, I don't think that's appropriate. Please," the young woman insisted, taking her hands. "I need your support. Not to defend my lies, but to help me express my truths. No one listens to me like you do." The request put Emily at an ethical and professional crossroads. Accepting would mean risking her already precarious position even more. Refusing would mean abandoning Sarah at a crucial moment. After a moment of reflection, Emily made her decision. "I'll talk to your father first," she proposed. "If he agrees to my being present, I'll do it. But this has to be on his terms, Sarah. We've imposed our conditions too much already." The young woman nodded, reluctantly accepting the response. "Thank you," she said simply, hugging Emily before leaving, "for believing in me even when I don't deserve it." When she was alone, Emily didn't hesitate. She walked directly to Michael's office, determined to face the situation with absolute honesty. She found him reviewing architectural plans, apparently absorbed in a new project. "Do you have a moment?" she asked from the doorway. Michael looked up, his expression indecipherable. "Come in," he responded, indicating a chair. Emily went straight to the point. "Sarah just visited me," she informed him. "She wants to talk to you tonight about her university plans, about everything. And she's asked me to be present." Surprise briefly crossed Michael's face. "And what did you tell her?" "That I would only do it if you agreed," Emily responded firmly. "This should be on your terms, Michael. She's your daughter." The businessman studied her attentively, as if evaluating her sincerity. "Why would she want you to be present?" he finally asked. "What role does she expect you to play?" Emily carefully considered her response. "I think she needs someone to help her communicate with you," she explained. "Someone who can translate, not just her words, but her feelings and aspirations." A sad smile appeared on Michael's lips. "Ironic, isn't it?" he commented. "Hiring the best translator in New York and discovering that I can't understand my own daughter without intermediaries. We all sometimes need help expressing what truly matters," Emily offered. "Even the best communicators." A reflective silence extended between them, before Michael slowly nodded. "All right," he conceded. "Tonight, at home. But Emily, I warn you, if this is another attempt at manipulation—" "It's not," she assured him with conviction. "I believe Sarah is ready to be honest. Completely honest. And that may be difficult to hear." The meeting at the Harrison mansion that night was intense and emotionally exhausting. Sarah, with a maturity that surprised even Emily, presented her true desires and plans for the future. She spoke about her relationship with Kevin with frankness, but also with respect, describing not only her feelings, but the genuine qualities she admired in him. The most difficult part was when she addressed her relationship with Jennifer, who significantly had decided to absent herself from the meeting. "It's not that I don't respect her," Sarah explained, carefully choosing her words. "It's that I've never felt she sees me as anything more than an extension of you, Dad. An accessory that must be molded to fit her vision of the perfect family." Michael listened in silence, his expression fluctuating between pain, surprise, and, occasionally, glimpses of proud recognition at his daughter's eloquence and determination. Emily intervened little, primarily to help clarify points or soften moments of tension. Her presence, however, seemed to provide both father and daughter with an anchor of stability amid the emotional turbulence. When Sarah finally finished, exhausted but visibly relieved, Michael remained silent for a long time. Emily held her breath, fearing both an explosion of anger and a cold rejection. What followed was completely unexpected. "Thank you for your honesty," Michael finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I don't agree with all your decisions, especially the lies. But I deeply respect your courage to defend your vision for the future." Sarah, who had been prepared for a battle, momentarily seemed disconcerted by the response. "So, you're not angry?" she asked cautiously. "Oh, I'm furious about the lies," Michael clarified with a tense smile. "And there will definitely be consequences for that. But I'm proud of the woman you're becoming," he continued, his voice softening. "A woman with the courage to defend her convictions, even in the face of disapproval." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and she ran to hug her father. Emily observed the embrace with a mixture of relief and emotion, feeling she had witnessed something deeply significant, the moment when a father truly recognizes his daughter's emerging identity. When she finally withdrew, leaving father and daughter to continue their conversation in private, Michael accompanied her to the door. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being here, for being the bridge we needed." Emily nodded, unsure how to respond. "It's what I do, isn't it?" she finally replied. "Translate what can't be expressed directly." Michael studied her with an intensity that made her feel momentarily vulnerable. "Emily, about what's happened these days," he began. "It's not necessary," she interrupted him. "I understand your reaction. It was completely justified." "Not entirely," he admitted. "I allowed my fear and wounded pride to cloud my judgment. I reacted as if you had betrayed my trust, when in reality you were just trying to protect someone we both care about." The admission, unexpected and genuinely humble, took Emily by surprise. During these months she had seen many facets of Michael Harrison, the relentless businessman, the concerned father, the lonely man behind a facade of success. But she had never witnessed this capacity to acknowledge his own mistakes without justifications. "We all make mistakes when we try to protect those we love," she offered, remembering her mother's words. "True," Michael nodded, smiling slightly, "though some of us have a habit of making them on a more dramatic scale than others." The self-deprecating comment broke the tension, provoking a shared laugh that seemed to re-establish the balance between them. "See you tomorrow at the office," Emily said goodbye, aware that something fundamental had changed in their professional relationship, though she couldn't yet define exactly what. During the ride home, she reflected on how each crisis seemed to lead to greater clarity. Sarah's lie, painful as it had been, had provoked a necessary honesty that might not have emerged otherwise. Sometimes, thought Emily as she watched New York's lights slide past the taxi window, the most valuable words are those that are hardest for us to pronounce. Spring arrived in New York with an explosion of color and renewal that seemed to reflect the changes in Emily's life. 6 months after that fateful day when she had offered her translation services, her position in the Harrison Group was firmly established. Her department had expanded, incorporating specialists in various languages and cultures. Under her direction, they had developed an international negotiation protocol that was becoming a reference within the sector. Emily had resumed her doctoral studies, attending tutorials 2 afternoons a week with Michael's full support. Margaret's health had improved significantly. The experimental treatment showed promising results, to the point that doctors were cautiously speaking of partial remission. Mother and daughter had been able to take a brief trip to Cape Cod, the first in years that wasn't related to medical visits. The French lessons with Sarah had evolved into informal university preparation sessions. The young woman had been accepted at Boston University to study international cooperation, and although Jennifer had shown her disapproval, Michael had remained firm in his support. Kevin, Sarah's boyfriend, had been formally introduced to the family. To everyone's surprise, especially Emily's, Michael and the young man had unexpectedly connected well. They shared a passion for medieval history, and despite their different political perspectives, maintained animated but respectful discussions that Sarah observed with pride. Jennifer, however, remained distant and cold, both with Emily and with her stepdaughter's plans. The tension in the Harrisons' marriage had become increasingly evident, manifesting in Jennifer's prolonged absences as she had increased her travels and social commitments. One Tuesday morning, while Emily was reviewing some contracts for a new operation in South America, she received an unexpected call from Rebecca, the executive with whom she maintained sporadic contact. "Emily, dear," Rebecca greeted with her characteristic enthusiasm, "how are things in the Big Apple?" "Quite well, thank you," Emily responded, smiling at the perpetual comment about the weather. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I'm in New York for a few days and would like to see you," explained Rebecca. "I have a proposal that might interest you." Emily's curiosity was immediately piqued. "Of course. Would tomorrow for lunch work for you?" "Perfect," confirmed Rebecca. "There's a new restaurant near Central Park that they say is excellent. I'll send you the address." Upon hanging up, Emily wondered what kind of proposal the executive might have in mind. Although she appreciated their professional friendship, she had always detected an underlying interest in recruiting her for her company. The restaurant chosen by Rebecca proved to be an elegant establishment specializing in Mediterranean American fusion. The executive was already waiting, impeccably dressed and with her characteristic vibrant energy. "Emily," she exclaimed, rising to kiss her on both cheeks. Every time I see you, you seem more radiant. Corporate life suits you well." Emily smiled, accepting the compliment with grace. "And you seem to never age," she responded sincerely. "What's your secret?" "Martinis and dancing," laughed Rebecca, winking, "and never taking life too seriously." After ordering, Rebecca went straight to the point. "We're expanding our operations in Europe," she explained, referring to the conglomerate she worked for. "And we need someone to lead our new international relations division in Brussels." Emily almost choked on her water. "Brussels?" "Exactly," confirmed Rebecca. "Seat of the European Union, crossroads of cultures, modern Babel, where your talents would be invaluable." The offer was impressive, a salary substantially higher than what she currently earned, a team 3 times larger under her direction, and the opportunity to work directly with European institutions. "It's very generous," Emily acknowledged, genuinely impressed. "But my life is here, Rebecca. My mother, my commitments." "Your mother could receive the same treatment in Brussels, or even better," argued Rebecca. "And as for commitments, is there someone special holding the brilliant Emily Parker in New York?" The question prompted an immediate reflection in Emily. Since her separation from David, she hadn't started any romantic relationship, absorbed in her career and caring for her mother. And yet, there was a presence in her life that, without being romantic, occupied a significant space. Michael. Their professional relationship had deepened in recent months, evolving into a partnership based on mutual respect and trust. They worked well together, complementing their respective strengths. Emily brought cultural perspective and diplomatic sensitivity. Michael, strategic vision and determination. They had developed a complicity that went beyond the strictly professional, though both scrupulously maintained boundaries. "There's no one in that sense," she finally responded, "but I have moral commitments, people who trust me." Rebecca nodded understandingly. "I don't need an immediate answer," she said, handing her an envelope. "Here are all the details of the offer. Take a couple of weeks to consider it." "I will," Emily promised, though she already felt a disturbing certainty that her answer would be negative. The rest of the lunch passed with lighter conversations, but the offer remained as a subtext between them. As they said goodbye, Rebecca hugged her with genuine affection. "Whatever your decision, remember that value isn't just in accepting opportunities, but also in recognizing when you have exactly what you need," she said with surprising seriousness. "Sometimes what we search for all our lives is already in front of us, but we don't see it clearly." Rebecca's words resonated with Emily throughout the day. That night, while reviewing the details of the offer in her apartment, she received a message from Michael. "I need your advice on a personal matter. May I call?" Intrigued, Emily responded affirmatively. Minutes later, her phone rang. "I'm sorry to bother you at this hour," Michael began, his voice tense. "But you've shown good judgment in complicated situations." "What's happening?" There was a pause before Michael continued. "Jennifer and I are separating," he announced with forced calm. "She has decided. Apparently she's been planning it for months." The news, though not completely unexpected given the evident distance between the couple, impacted Emily. "I'm very sorry," she offered sincerely. "I'm not sure I am," Michael confessed with brutal honesty. "And that worries me." "Shouldn't I feel more after 5 years together?" The question was deeply personal, crossing a line they had tacitly maintained between them. Emily carefully considered her response. "There isn't a should in feelings, Michael," she finally said. "Each relationship is unique and the end of each is experienced differently." "Sarah is devastated," he continued. "Not by the separation itself, which I think she even expected, but because Jennifer has made it very clear that she doesn't want to maintain any link with her." Emily felt a pang of pain for the young woman. Despite her differences with Jennifer, Sarah had sought her approval for years. "That's cruel," she commented, unable to contain herself. "It is," Michael agreed. "And it makes me question whether I ever really knew the woman I married." The conversation extended longer than either had anticipated. Michael shared details that evidenced a relationship built more on appearances and convenience than on genuine love. Emily listened, offering occasional observations, but mainly providing the space he needed to process his emotions. "Thank you for listening," Michael finally said. "I had forgotten what it feels like to talk to someone who really pays attention. It's the least I can do." Emily responded, aware of the many times he had done the same for her. "Emily," Michael began, his voice adopting a different tone. "There's something else I should tell you." The change in his intonation alerted Emily. She felt an inexplicable nervousness, as if she were at the edge of a precipice. "I'm listening," she said, trying to maintain her calm. "For a long time I've been—" Michael interrupted himself, apparently reconsidering his words. "No, this isn't the time. Forgive me. We'll talk tomorrow at the office." The call ended, leaving Emily confused and slightly anxious. What had Michael been about to confess? And why had he retracted at the last moment? That night, as she tried to fall asleep, Emily reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. The Brussels offer, which at another time she would have considered the pinnacle of her professional aspirations, now seemed strangely empty compared to what she had built in New York. Not just her position at the Harrison Group, but the human connections, her renewed relationship with her mother, her bond with Sarah, and this complex but deeply satisfying collaboration with Michael. Perhaps, she thought as sleep finally overcame her, real success isn't in climbing higher, but in building deeper foundations where we already are. The next day, upon arriving at the office, Emily found an unusual atmosphere. Rumors about the Harrison separation had spread quickly, generating a buzz of barely disguised speculation. Victoria, the financial director who over time had gone from rival to reluctant ally, intercepted her in the hallway. "Did you know?" she asked without preamble. "I found out last night," Emily responded cautiously. Victoria studied her intensely. "He called you first," she observed, "before any of us who've worked with him for years." The comment, laden with implications, made Emily tense. "It was a personal conversation," she defended herself. "It has no professional relevance." "Everything related to Michael Harrison has professional relevance," Victoria responded with a touch of bitterness. "Especially when it affects his judgment." Before Emily could respond, Michael's assistant appeared to inform her that the boss was waiting for her in his office. Upon entering, she found Michael apparently absorbed in his computer, though a careful observer would notice the tension in his shoulders and the fatigue in his eyes. "Good morning," Emily greeted, closing the door behind her. Michael looked up, offering her a tired smile. "I apologize for last night's conversation," he said without preamble. "I shouldn't have imposed my personal problems on you." "It wasn't an imposition," Emily assured, sitting across from him. "That's what friends are for." The word friends hung suspended between them, laden with unspoken questions. Is that what they really were? Simply friends and colleagues? "There's something I need to tell you," Michael continued, picking up the thread of the conversation interrupted the night before. "But first, how was your lunch with Rebecca?" The question, apparently casual, surprised Emily. "It was interesting," she responded, unsure how much to reveal. "She's a fascinating woman." "And she made you an offer for Brussels," Michael completed, his tone neutral, but his gaze intense. Emily couldn't hide her surprise. "How do you know?" "The business world is small, Emily," explained Michael, "especially when it comes to exceptional talent. Rebecca hasn't been particularly discreet about her intention to recruit you." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Emily felt strangely guilty, as if she had been discovered in some betrayal. "I haven't made any decision," she finally clarified. "In fact, I was going to talk to you about it today." "Are you going to accept?" Michael asked directly. "I don't know," Emily responded honestly. "It's an extraordinary opportunity, but New York is your home," he completed. "Your mother is here. Your life is here." Emily nodded, though she felt there was something more, something she wasn't mentioning. "What did you want to tell me?" she asked, changing the subject. Michael stood, walking to the window with his hands in his pockets. His posture reflected an internal tension that Emily had rarely witnessed in him. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," he began, "about what really matters, what I want to build in this stage of my life." He paused, as if searching for the exact words. "The separation from Jennifer has been, in a way, clarifying," he continued. "It has forced me to face truths that I've been avoiding. About my marriage, about my priorities, about feelings that I've been suppressing." Emily held her breath, sensing they were approaching dangerous territory. "Michael, if this is about—" "It's about us," he interrupted, turning to look at her directly. About what we've built professionally, but also about what we could build personally if you—" The rest of the sentence was suspended when the door abruptly opened. Sarah burst into the office, pale and visibly upset. "Dad, Emily's mother is in the hospital. Margaret, they just called from your department, Emily. It's urgent." Emily's world seemed to stop. Everything, the Brussels offer, Michael's imminent confession, vanished before the only word that mattered: urgent. Without waiting for details, Emily was already in motion, grabbing her purse while Michael gave rapid instructions for his car to be prepared. "I'll take you," he said simply, leaving no room for discussion. The ride to the hospital was a blur of anxiety and silent prayers. Emily, normally so eloquent, found herself without words, clinging to the hand that Michael offered her in silence. When they finally arrived, she ran to the emergency room where Dr. Thompson was waiting with a grave expression. "What happened?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "A collapse during the therapy session," explained the doctor. "Her heart. There were complications we didn't expect." "Is she—" Emily couldn't complete the question. "She's stable for now," responded Dr. Thompson, "but we need to make decisions about treatment immediately." The following hours passed in a haze of medical terms, forms, and impossible decisions. Emily, normally so meticulous with words, found herself struggling to understand what the doctors were trying to communicate to her. It was Michael who, remaining constantly by her side, translated the medical jargon into comprehensible terms, who asked the precise questions she couldn't formulate. When they finally allowed her to see Margaret, Emily found her connected to multiple machines, her pale face contrasting with the white sheets. But her eyes, when they opened upon feeling Emily's presence, retained the same clarity and love as always. "Don't make that face, sweetheart," Margaret whispered with a weak voice. "It's just a small setback." Emily tried to smile through the tears she couldn't contain. "The doctors say you need an intervention," she explained, holding her mother's hand. "It's risky, but without it—" "I know," Margaret interrupted with surprising serenity. "I've already spoken with Dr. Thompson, and I've made my decision." "Mom, please, I'm going to do it, Emily." The firmness in her voice contrasted with her physical frailty. "But I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Emily responded without hesitation. "No matter what happens, you'll move forward." Margaret's eyes fixed on her daughters with intensity. "You'll continue building this new life you've begun, without guilt, without regrets. Promise me." Emily felt her mother was asking the impossible. How could she move forward if she lost the person for whom she had reorganized her entire existence for years? "I promise," she finally said, knowing it was what her mother needed to hear. "Good," Margaret smiled weakly. "Now, could you ask that handsome boss of yours to come in for a moment? I'd like to speak with him." The request surprised Emily. "With Michael? Why?" "I have my reasons," responded Margaret, with a flash of her usual determination. Some things can only be said from mother to suitor. The comment, unexpected in such grave circumstances, provoked in Emily a laugh broken by crying. "Mom, it's not what you think." "Please, Emily," Margaret interrupted. "After all this time, do you think I don't recognize that look? The same one your father had every time he observed me when he thought I didn't notice." Emily had no strength to argue. She nodded and went to find Michael, who had remained in the waiting room, providing her space but staying available. "My mother wants to speak with you," she informed him, still disconcerted by the request. Alone. Michael seemed momentarily surprised, but nodded and headed to the room. Emily observed them through the window, Michael leaning respectfully over the bed, Margaret speaking to him with a serious expression. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but when Michael emerged, there was something different in his gaze. A determination mixed with an emotion that Emily couldn't interpret. "What did she say?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "That," Michael responded with an enigmatic smile, "is between your mother and me. But I assure you, she's an extraordinary woman, Emily. Now I perfectly understand where your strength comes from." The next 48 hours were the longest in Emily's life. The surgical intervention, delicate and complex, kept Margaret in the operating room for hours that seemed eternal. Michael didn't leave Emily's side, except to resolve urgent matters by phone or to bring her coffee and food that she barely touched. Sarah also appeared, bringing with her a youthful and optimistic energy that contrasted with the gravity of the situation. She took turns with Emily for the vigils, insisting that she rest, while she kept Margaret company during her brief moments of consciousness. It was during one of these vigils that Sarah addressed the topic that hung between them. "You know my father's in love with you, don't you?" she asked directly, with the frankness that characterized her. Emily, physically and emotionally exhausted, had no energy for evasions. "It's complicated, Sarah." "Not really," the young woman insisted. "I see it in how he looks at you, how he talks about you. I never saw him like this with Jennifer, not even at the beginning." "Your father is going through a difficult time," Emily reasoned. "A recent separation, emotional confusion." "Emily," Sarah interrupted with surprising maturity, "stop looking for excuses. If you feel the same for him, don't waste the opportunity out of fear or doubts. Life is too fragile and precious for that." The young woman's words, spoken in the context of a hospital where the fragility of life was a constant presence, resonated deeply with Emily. But before she could respond, a nurse appeared to inform them that Margaret had awakened, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic. When Margaret was finally transferred from intensive care to a regular room, 3 days after the intervention, Emily could breathe for the first time. The immediate danger had passed, though recovery would be long, and with uncertain results. One afternoon, while Margaret napped and Emily worked on her laptop by the hospital window, she received a message from Rebecca. "I need your answer about Brussels by Friday. Can we talk?" The decision, which before Margaret's crisis had seemed complex, now presented itself with crystal clarity. Emily responded immediately. "I enormously appreciate the opportunity, but I must decline. My place is in New York, now more than ever." Almost immediately after sending the message, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Michael observing her with an indecipherable expression. "I just declined the Brussels offer," said Emily, feeling she owed him an explanation. "My mother needs me here." Michael nodded slowly. "Only your mother?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual, but his eyes intensely focused on her. The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Emily knew her answer would define not just her professional future, but also her personal one. "No," she finally responded, opting for absolute honesty. "Not just my mother." Michael took a step toward her, closing the distance that separated them. "Emily, what I tried to tell you that day in my office," he began. "I know," she softly interrupted. "I think I've known for a long time." "And?" Michael's voice barely a whisper. Emily looked at the bed where her mother slept peacefully. The last few days had been a brutal reminder of how ephemeral life could be, of how important moments could be lost, waiting for the perfect time that never came. "And I think we should explore that possibility," she responded, turning her gaze back to him. Calmly, with respect, without pressures or expectations, step by step. The smile that illuminated Michael's face was like a sunrise after the darkest night. Without words, he took Emily's hand and squeezed it gently, a simple gesture but full of promise. From the bed, Margaret observed the scene with half-open eyes and a barely perceptible smile on her lips. In the doorway, unnoticed by the couple, Sarah contemplated the moment with a mixture of satisfaction and tenderness. "The most important words," thought Emily as she returned Michael's smile, "sometimes are those we don't need to speak aloud to be understood." 1 year later, the penthouse where everything had begun was resplendent under the late afternoon sun of New York. Transformed for the occasion with flowers, lights, and elegantly arranged tables, it hosted an intimate but significant celebration, the first anniversary of the International Relations Department of the Harrison Group. Emily, dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress, observed the scene with a mixture of pride and amazement. Her team, which had grown to include 15 people of 7 different nationalities, conversed animatedly with executives, international clients, and representatives from educational institutions. In one corner, Margaret, recovered to a large extent, though still with some limitations, chatted with Dr. Thompson, whose experimental treatment had been such a notable success that it was being implemented with other patients. At her side, Kevin listened attentively, taking occasional notes. The young man had decided to orient his studies toward cooperation in medical research, inspired by the experience of Emily's mother. Sarah circulated among the guests with the natural grace of a born hostess. Her first year at university had exceeded all expectations, and she was already involved in international projects that combined her studies with field practices. Her relationship with Kevin continued, maturing into something they both took increasingly seriously. Victoria, initially the most skeptical about Emily's capabilities, was now one of her strongest advocates. The close collaboration between the financial department and the international one had resulted in synergies that benefited the entire company, and the former rivalry had transformed into mutual respect. Rebecca, visiting New York, conversed animatedly with American business people. After Emily's refusal of the Brussels offer, they had maintained a cordial and mutually beneficial relationship, collaborating on projects that connected America and Europe. And Michael? Emily searched for him with her gaze, finally locating him as he ascended the small improvised stage. The murmur of conversations gradually faded as everyone directed their attention toward him. "Thank you all for joining us in this celebration," he began, his voice clear and confident. "1 year ago we initiated an experiment to create a department that would not just translate words, but build bridges between cultures, markets, and people." He paused, searching for Emily among the crowd. When their gazes met, a complicit smile formed on his lips. "What began as an intuition has become a fundamental pillar of our global strategy," he continued. "And all thanks to one person who had the courage to raise her voice when no one expected her to speak." Emily felt the heat rise to her cheeks as eyes turned toward her. "Emily Parker has taught us that true communication goes far beyond language." Michael's voice softened, acquiring a more personal tone. "It's about understanding not just what the words say, but what they mean in their deepest context." The applause erupted spontaneously, forcing Michael to pause. When they calmed, he continued with a smile. "But tonight we're not just celebrating a business success, we're also celebrating the human connections that make everything else possible." With a gesture, he invited Emily to join him on the stage. She advanced, aware of the gazes but focused solely on Michael, on the warmth in his eyes and the firmness of his hand when he helped her up. "Exactly 1 year ago I had the wisdom to listen to this extraordinary woman," Michael continued, now addressing Emily directly. "And since then, every day has been a lesson on the value of authenticity, dignity, and true communication." Emily, usually eloquent, found herself momentarily speechless before the emotion his voice conveyed. "Our department has achieved exceptional results," Michael continued, addressing the audience again. "But perhaps the most important achievement has been demonstrating that traditional hierarchies and prejudices about who can significantly contribute are, at best, self-imposed limitations and, at worst, obstacles to discovering extraordinary talents." The applause resonated again, especially enthusiastic among the younger members of the team, for whom Emily had become a role model. "And now," Michael proceeded when silence was restored, "I'd like to announce the next phase of our international vision." With a gesture, he indicated to one of his assistants to unveil an architectural model that had remained covered throughout the evening. It represented an elegant building with modern but welcoming lines. "I present to you the future Margaret Parker Center for Linguistic and Cultural Studies," he announced with evident pride. "A space where young people with talent but limited resources can receive excellence training in languages, translation, and cultural mediation." A collective gasp ran through the audience. Emily, completely surprised, looked at Michael with disbelief and then searched for her mother among the guests. Margaret, visibly moved, nodded, confirming she was already aware of the project. "The center," Michael continued, "will offer full scholarships to students selected for their potential, not their economic means. And it will be directed by an academic council chaired, if she accepts, by Emily Parker." The ovation that followed was deafening. Emily, overwhelmed by emotion, could barely articulate a thank you when Michael handed her the microphone. "This is unexpected," she began, struggling to maintain her composure. "And deeply moving." She took a deep breath, gradually recovering her usual eloquence. "Just over a year ago I was cleaning these very windows," she continued, pointing to the penthouse's large windows, "not because it was my vocation, but because circumstances had led me to postpone my dreams, to attend to more urgent needs." A respectful silence settled as everyone listened attentively. "What I've learned since then," Emily proceeded, "is that talent is distributed equally but opportunities are not, and that sometimes A simple phrase at the right moment can open doors we didn't even know existed. Her gaze crossed with Michael's, communicating without words all they had shared and built together over the last year. Their relationship had evolved with the same naturalness and depth as their professional collaboration. Step by step, with mutual respect and an understanding that transcended words. "I accept this challenge with humility and determination," Emily concluded, "so that no talent is lost for lack of opportunities, so that no valuable voice is silenced by external circumstances." When they descended from the stage, amid applause and congratulations, Michael discreetly took Emily's hand. "Surprised?" he asked in a low voice. "Completely," she acknowledged. "When did you plan all this?" "The project has been in the works for 6 months," Michael confessed. "But the idea was born much earlier, the day you offered to translate that contract for $500. Emily looked at him in surprise. "That far back?" "That day I saw something that I had forgotten existed," explained Michael, his voice barely audible above the murmur of the party. "Genuine dignity, independent of external circumstances. You reminded me that a person's true worth isn't in their position or resources, but in their integrity and capability." The rest of the evening passed in a whirlwind of conversations, congratulations, and toasts. But for Emily, the most significant moment came when, near the end of the celebration, she found herself alone with her mother in a quiet corner of the terrace. "Did you know about the centre?" she asked, though the answer was evident. Margaret smiled complicitly. "Michael consulted me months ago," she confessed. "He wanted my approval, before using my name." "And what did you tell him?" Emily inquired, curious about the conversation that must have taken place. "I told him that a man capable of seeing beyond appearances to recognize the true worth of people deserved my trust," responded Margaret, her eyes shining with wisdom. "And that any institution bearing my name should maintain that same principle as its foundation." Emily hugged her mother, silently thanking her for all the lessons she had taught her over the years. Lessons about dignity, perseverance, and the courage to remain true to oneself even in the most adverse circumstances. Later, when most of the guests had departed, Emily and Michael found themselves in the same corner of the terrace where everything had begun. New York's night sky stretched above them, sprinkled with stars that competed with the city lights. "An incredible year," commented Michael, intertwining his fingers with Emily's. "And to think that it all began with an impulsive offer to translate a document," reflected Emily with a smile. "It wasn't impulsive," Michael corrected. "It was an act of courage. You risked being rejected or ridiculed because you knew your own worth." Emily considered his words. "Perhaps," she conceded. "Or perhaps I was simply desperate for $500. They both laughed, sharing the private joke that had become part of their common history. "Do you know what your mother asked me that day in the hospital?" Michael suddenly said, remembering his private conversation with Margaret. Emily shook her head. She had always respected the mystery of that exchange. "She asked me if I was capable of seeing beyond the brilliant director to appreciate the extraordinary woman," he revealed, "and if I had the necessary humility to learn from someone who had demonstrated more wisdom in her decisions than I had in all my corporate strategies." "And what did you respond?" Emily asked, moved by her mother's question. "That I was learning," Michael responded with simple honesty, "and that I hope to continue doing so for a long time." The silence that followed was full of unspoken but deeply felt promises. Without words, both knew that what they had built, professionally and personally, was just the beginning of a path they would walk together step by step, with the same mutual respect and admiration that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. As they contemplated the city stretched below them, Emily reflected on the extraordinary journey that had taken her from cleaning windows to leading an international department and soon an educational center. A journey that had begun with 5 simple words spoken in a moment of audacity. What had changed wasn't just her external circumstances, but her fundamental understanding of herself and the possibilities that opened when one dared to claim their true place in the world. "Words have power," she thought as Michael wrapped an arm around her, drawing her to him with tenderness. "Not just to convey meanings, but to transform realities, to create bridges where there were once walls, to illuminate hidden potentials, to give voice to silenced truths." And perhaps that was the most valuable lesson from this extraordinary adventure, that sometimes the most powerful words are those we dare to pronounce when all circumstances invite us to remain silent. I'll translate it for $500. 5 words that had changed the course of multiple lives, demonstrating that true worth never resides in social position or material resources, but in the courage to recognize and defend the inherent dignity that we all possess.